218 feet down, inside solid, black canyon rock. A diamond bit chews forward at maybe 11 feet an hour. And the 26-year-old watching the gauges has no idea that in about 6 minutes, everything he believes about this canyon is going to come apart in his hands. It's a little after 2 in the morning, February 19th, 1933. The air on the Nevada rim is cold enough to fog breath, even though everyone who's worked this stretch of the Colorado River knows that by June, the same rock will be too hot to touch bare-handed. Down in Black Canyon, the big story is the dam. 6 companies incorporated has thousands of men blasting diversion tunnels through both canyon walls, 4 of them, each bored 50 feet across, driven better than 4,000 feet through solid rock so the river can be shoved out of its own bed. That's the project everyone's heard of. This isn't that story. This is a smaller crew, working a smaller hole. On a side job, nobody outside the Bureau of Reclamation's exploration section had any reason to care about. His name is Everett Doss, and this particular night he's an assistant geologist with a 2-year-old engineering degree from the University of Nevada and a job he mostly got because his older brother knew a man in the Denver office. He's not a hero. He's not the toughest man on the crew. He is, by every account left behind, careful, methodical. The kind of man who fills a field notebook the way other men fill a diary, in tight, patient handwriting, because somebody once taught him that when you're the last man to see a piece of ground before it gets blasted, filled, or paved over, your notes are the only thing that will ever prove it existed at all. That habit is the only reason we know any of this. At 2:11 that morning, according to the drilling log later recovered from Doss's personal papers, the drill string drops 11 inches with no resistance at all. The foreman on the rig, a broad, sun-cracked man named Gilbert Moss, who drilled water wells across 3 states before signing on for the dam job, kills the motor on pure instinct. In the sudden quiet, you can hear the generator ticking as it cools, and you can hear the river a long way down, and you can hear nothing at all coming back up the hole. "Get me a plumb line," Moss says. It's the only piece of dialogue from that night Doss ever wrote down word for word. And he wrote it down more than once, in more than one notebook, across more than 20 years. I want to pause here for just a second, because I know some of you are new to the channel. I make videos like this because stories like the one you're about to hear almost never get the spotlight. They're not the kind of history that ends up in the textbook chapter on Hoover Dam, next to the concrete pour statistics and the photographs of high scalers swinging on ropes over the canyon. They're the stuff that gets one paragraph in a county historical society newsletter, if that, and then quietly disappears because nobody funds the preservation of a story nobody can prove. If you want more of these, the forgotten legends, the half-documented mysteries, the folklore that almost got buried along with whatever it was actually about, the best way to make sure this channel keeps finding them is to subscribe. It genuinely does help keep this kind of history alive. Okay. Now, back into the story. They lower a weighted line into the hole. At 218 feet, it should have found rock. Instead, it keeps going. 220 feet, 240, and at 261 feet, the line finally goes slack. When they haul it back up, the last 3 feet of cord are coated in a fine, pale dust, unlike anything either man has seen coming out of that wall before. Not the reddish sandstone that dominates the upper canyon. Not the dark volcanic breccia underneath it. Something closer, Doss would write. to the powder off an old plaster wall. Before we go further, a little on who Everett Doss actually was, because the rest of this story only makes sense once you understand the kind of man it happened to. He was born in 1906 in Kingman, Arizona, the younger of two sons of a hardware store owner. And by every surviving account, he was the quiet one. The boy who took apart the store's clock twice just to see if he could put it back together correctly both times. He studied mining engineering and geology at the University of Nevada in Reno, graduating in 1931 into the worst labor market of his lifetime. And it was his older brother, a surveyor who'd already found work on the Boulder Canyon project, who got him an interview with the Bureau of Reclamation's exploration section. Doss arrived in the new company town of Boulder City in the spring of 1932, one of thousands of men chasing one of the only large construction jobs left in the country. He roomed in a boarding house with 3 other men his age, wrote long letters home to his mother almost every week, dozens of which survive, and, according to those letters, spent his first summer on the job stunned by the heat, which that year climbed past 119 degrees on the canyon floor more than once. He watched the high scalers work the canyon walls on ropes, clearing loose rock ahead of the drilling crews, and wrote to his mother that he'd never in his life seen men do a job that looked so much like flying and so much like falling at the same time. By February of 1933, he had logged 80-some exploratory drill holes for the Bureau, checking rock quality ahead of various proposed structures, spillways, outlet works, intake towers, that the engineers were still finalising. Drill hole DH114 on the Nevada wall roughly 600 feet above the river's low water line should have been number 81. Nothing more. The district engineer overseeing the program was a heavy-set, deliberate man named Arthur Halloway, who had been with the Bureau since the earliest survey years of the Boulder Canyon project. Halloway's own memo on the DH114 void, filed March 1st, 1933, and later catalogued in Bureau records as Geological Exploration Report Number 88, ordered the crew to keep coring straight through and log whatever came up. What came up over the following 9 days was almost nothing. The bit passed through open space for nearly 19 feet before it touched anything solid again, and when it did, the core it returned wasn't rock at all. It was cut stone. Doss's notebook, the one his grandson would eventually donate to a regional historical archive decades after Doss's death, which is the only reason any of this survives in his own words, describes the sample on what he numbered Field Notebook 12, page 47. A grey, close-grained stone, he wrote, dressed on one face flat enough to lay a level across it and watch the bubble sit dead centre. Worked stone, cut and finished by hands, hundreds of feet inside a canyon wall that, as far as anyone at the Bureau knew, had never held so much as a footpath. Halloway made the call that would define the next 4 months of Everett Doss's life. Rather than plug the hole and relocate the spillway survey, as ordinary caution might have suggested, he authorised a hand-cut exploratory adit, a narrow-shored gallery, chiselled by hand, following the drill hole's path down into whatever they'd found. Through March and into April of 1933, a crew of 6 men working overlapping shifts cut roughly 4 feet of gallery a day through hard rock, shoring the ceiling as they went, until the passage reached 261 feet and finally broke through. Doss was the 3rd man in. His notebook entry for April 14th, 1933, is the longest single passage he ever wrote, and it's worth hearing close to how he wrote it, because the rest of his life would circle back to it again and again. He describes squeezing through a gap in broken stone barely wide enough for his shoulders, and having his lantern light simply vanish into a darkness, with no wall, no ceiling, and no floor sound bouncing back the way a normal room gives one. He describes calling out once, just to hear where his own voice went, and getting an echo back that took, by his estimate, close to 4 full seconds to return. A cathedral could sit inside a 4-second echo. Several of them, probably, stacked on top of each other. What the survey crew mapped over the following weeks, using compass, chain, and eventually a hand-cranked odometer wheel dragged along the floor because their measuring tape kept running out, reads less like a cave system and more like the ruin of a city built to be seen from very far away. A stone avenue paved in fitted slabs ran at least 1,100 surveyed feet before the crew's wire played out and they simply stopped. Not because the avenue ended, but because they'd run out of string. Along its east side, a staircase climbed out of the darkness in rises. Doss measured individually with a carpenter's rule at 27 inches each, on treads roughly 6 feet deep. A scale no human stride was ever built to climb comfortably. It surveyed length before it vanished under a rockfall nobody dared clear by hand, ran past 900 feet. At the top of that staircase stood an archway. Doss and the survey party put its opening at just over 40 feet wide and, triangulating off their strongest lantern beam against the darkness above, something closer to 70 feet tall. Beyond it, spaced along what looked like a processional hall, stood columns roughly 12 feet in diameter. Their surfaces worked with long vertical fluting rising up out of the lamplight into a ceiling nobody's beam ever found. Doss's field sketches, drafted from his measurements by a young bureau draftsman named Louis Pruitt, who'd been temporarily assigned to the survey party for his drawing hand, show faint bands of geometric carving running along the base of several columns, described, in Pruitt's own notes, only as regular, repeating, not decorative in the way our stonework is decorative. More like counting marks, if counting marks were carved 8 inches deep. Doss's notes describe the walls flanking the avenue as unlike anything in his geology training. Not the neat, coursed masonry of a bureau retaining wall, but massive, irregular blocks, fitted together without any binding mortar at all. Some measured at 9 feet across, and others closer to 20. Interlocking along uneven, almost puzzle-piece seams, so tight that water couldn't have run between them. It's the kind of construction later made famous in guidebooks about far older ruins on other continents. Huge stones cut to interlock rather than stack. And Doss, who had no reason to know that vocabulary in 1933, simply called it wallwork heavier than anything I've seen built by men. Off the north side of the processional hall, roughly 700 feet in, the survey party found an opening into a second space that dwarfed the hall itself. They never mapped its far boundary. Doss's odometer wheel logged 190 feet before the floor dropped away into what he described as a stepped depression, forcing the party to stop rather than risk a fall by lantern light alone. Sound behaves differently there, he wrote. His 4-second echo from the entrance stretched to nearly 7, which by any rough calculation puts that chamber's far wall, if it has one, well over 1,000 feet out. A cathedral, he wrote in the margin, almost bitterly, would be a modest thing to lose inside a room that size. The single stone block Doss measured most carefully. Because, he wrote, he didn't believe his own tape and measured it 3 separate times, sat near the base of the staircase, roughly 14 feet long, 9 feet wide, 6 feet thick. Using the standard density figures for dressed limestone from his bureau training, he calculated its weight at somewhere near 46 tons, moved and set. In his words, closer than the masonry crews are managing on the dam face today. And the dam face, in the spring of 1933, was being built with some of the most advanced construction equipment in the world. A second expedition in mid-May, this one including Halloway himself, followed the processional haul past the columns to what Doss's notebook calls, simply, the door. 2 stone leaves, each roughly 18 feet wide and 45 feet tall, stood fitted into a frame so precise that Doss couldn't work a knife blade into the seam between them. What struck the party most wasn't the size of the door itself, but what should have been its handles. 2 raised stone sockets, set into the leaves roughly 20 feet above the floor, far higher than any person could reach, without scaffolding, positioned exactly where a door handle belongs. If the hand meant to use it, stood a good deal taller than a man. Everything down there, Doss wrote, in a passage his son would later underline in red pencil, sometime after Doss's death, feels built for something a good deal larger than a man. I want to say something plainly here, because it matters for the rest of this story. There is no verified physical evidence that any of what I've just described still exists. No agency has ever confirmed a chamber, a stairway, or a 45-foot door beneath Black Canyon. What exists is a private notebook, a handful of report numbers that turn up in fragmentary bureau filing indexes without matching content behind them, and the accounts of a small number of people who, by every version of this story, never entirely agreed on what they'd seen. I'm telling you what the record, such as it is, says these men wrote and said. I am not telling you it's true. Through late April and May of 1933, the survey party kept generating the kind of paperwork that ordinarily builds a case. Geological Exploration Reports. 91 through 103. Glass plate negatives numbered 41 through 58, stored in a box marked DH-114 Supplementary. Pruitt's hand-drawn elevation sketches annotated down to the 1/8 of an inch, and a running payroll ledger listing the 6-man adit crew under badge numbers 3391 through 3397. Halloway, by Doss's account, grew increasingly cautious about who saw any of it. Visits from Boulder City's district office, which had been rare, became weekly. A stenographer was sent up once to take statements from the crew and never returned a second time. On May 9th, Doss noted, almost as an aside, that the surveyed coordinates for DH-114's collar, the exact point on the canyon rim where the hole began, had been re-recorded slightly differently in the office copy of the report. A little more than 4 feet off from his own field figures. A transcription slip, maybe. He wrote it down anyway. There's a detail from earlier I skipped past, and I want to circle back to it now, because it means nothing on its own, and only starts to feel strange once you know what comes later. DH-114's surveyed collar sits almost precisely above a spot that, according to a handful of prospectors' journals, held in a regional Nevada archive, an old-timer named Cassius Fields had marked on a hand-drawn river map back in the 1880s with a single word: stairs. Nobody knows what Fields meant by it. His journal never explains further, and there's no evidence Doss or Halloway ever laid eyes on that map at all. I'm not saying that proves anything, but I do think it's worth holding on to that detail. Because Fields wasn't the only person, long before any of this, who'd said something about this stretch of the canyon. Southern Paiute and Mojave communities have lived along this section of the Colorado River for a very long time, long before anyone drew a survey line for a dam. And both traditions carry old stories, oral tradition carried and reshaped across generations, about this canyon country holding the remains of a people who worked in stone before the ancestors of the communities living there today arrived. These are living oral traditions that belong to the people who hold them, not settled anthropological fact. And I don't want to flatten them into proof of anything. That isn't what they are, and it isn't how the people who tell them use them. What I can tell you is that when regional folklorists in the 1930s and 40s started collecting old river stories, they weren't the only ones telling them. A short item in a small river town newspaper from 1889 recorded a Colorado River steamboat captain describing, to a reporter's evident amusement, a stone stair some prospector claimed to have found going down into the rock somewhere in Black Canyon, decades before the Bureau of Reclamation drilled a single exploratory hole there. And more than one old-timer working the Nevada silver camps in the 1870s and 80s is said to have told a version of the same tale around a campfire, something built into the canyon long before anybody now living by somebody or something considerably larger than a man. A retired silver miner named Pruitt Callaway, no relation as far as anyone has ever established, to draftsman Lewis Pruitt, gave a similar account to a Nevada folklore collector in 1936, describing a story he'd heard 40 years earlier from an older miner about a door in the rock down toward the river, too big to be a mine and too square to be a cave. Callaway said he never went looking for it himself. He said the men who told him the story always ended it the same way. They hadn't gone looking either. None of that is proof the chambers Doss described were real. A canyon with strange acoustics, unstable rock, and a century of prospectors, steamboat men, and miners trading stories around a fire will generate legends with or without anything actually down there. I want to say that clearly, because the next part of this story is the part where things stop looking like ordinary carelessness and start looking, at least on paper, like something was being deliberately erased. On June 2nd, 1933, 3 men arrived at the DH-114 site, whom Doss's notebook never names beyond the district men. And separately, the 2 from Washington. Callaway met them at the adit entrance alone. Doss wasn't present for whatever was discussed. What he does record is what happened over the following 11 days. The adit crew, Moss, and the 5 others under badge numbers, 339, 1 through 3397, were pulled off the job on June 3rd and reassigned in staggered groups to diversion tunnel maintenance crews on the Arizona side of the river. A transfer that made little practical sense, since none of them had tunnel lining experience and all of them had been specifically trained for exploratory adit work. Fragmentary payroll records still held in Bureau archives show incomplete hour totals for 4 of the 6 men that pay period, with the word adjusted written in a different hand than the rest of the ledger. On June 6th, the same day, as it happens, that the first concrete for the dam itself was being poured elsewhere in the canyon, a genuinely documented and heavily photographed moment in the project's history. A much smaller, far less photographed pour was taking place 261 feet inside the Nevada Canyon Wall. Doss's notebook records the Aditi being filled with concrete in stages, working back from the deepest reachable point toward the drill collar, over 9 days. He estimated, from the mixing crew's own figures, something in the neighborhood of 140 cubic yards, poured into a passage that, by his earlier measurements, shouldn't have needed more than a fraction of that to seal. The 18 glass plate negatives, numbered 41 through 58, were crated on June 9th for shipment to the Bureau's Denver Regional Office, per a transfer slip Doss kept a carbon copy of. No negatives matching that numbering have ever surfaced in any surviving inventory of that office's photographic archive. Pruitt's elevation sketches went in the same crate. The original survey map showing the avenue, the staircase, and the great door was replaced in the district's working files, with a revised version, one Doss compared against his own originals and found, in his words, missing everything past station 4+40. A point barely past the adit entrance itself. Louis Pruitt, the young draftsman, was reassigned to a 6 companies drafting pool later that summer and, according to the one surviving letter from him in Doss's papers, was told plainly by a supervisor that his earlier sketches for the Bureau belonged to the government now and that he shouldn't expect to see them again. Holloway himself was transferred to a different section of the Boulder Canyon project within the month. Doss never spoke to him again. I said this story includes at least one person whose life was genuinely changed by what happened out there. And it's worth sitting with that before we finish. Because it's easy to treat old stories like this as pure entertainment and forget there were real people on the other end of them, whatever actually happened underground. Gilbert Moss, the foreman who first called down for a plumb line, was transferred that June to an Arizona-side tunnel crew and, by every account gathered decades later, was a changed man almost immediately. Former co-workers interviewed for a regional oral history project in the 1970s, long after Moss himself had died, remembered him as withdrawn, prone to long silences and entirely unwilling to discuss his earlier work on the exploration crew. He left the dam project altogether in the spring of 1934, more than a year before the dam's completion, and moved to Kingman, Arizona, where city directory records show him working as a well driller for the rest of his career. One interview subject, a former neighbor, recalled Moss mentioning the canyon exactly once, late at night at a diner, saying only that he'd seen a stair that went down farther than any stair has business going, before changing the subject and never bringing it up again. He wasn't a man who scared easy, the neighbor told the interviewer in 1974, according to the project's typed transcript. Something about that job did something to him, and he never once told me what. Moss died in 1958. His family has no record that he ever wrote any of it down. Everett Doss handled it differently. He stayed with the Bureau of Reclamation 2 more years, finished out the Hoover Dam project in an ordinary, unremarkable capacity, and left government work altogether in 1936 to teach high school science and mathematics. In Kingman, Arizona, the same small town where Gilbert Moss had settled. There's no record the two men ever spoke again, though they lived in the same small town for over 20 years. Doss married in 1938, raised 3 children, and by every account from people who knew him, lived a quiet, well-regarded, thoroughly ordinary life. He taught until 1971 and almost never mentioned Black Canyon. Almost never. His son remembered him bringing it up exactly twice. Once, briefly and half drunk at a wedding, saying something about a door too big for anybody. And once, near the end of his life, telling his son plainly that he didn't expect to be believed, and didn't especially want to be. "I just want it written down somewhere," he reportedly said, "in case it matters to someone, someday." He died in 1979. It wasn't until 2003, when his grandson was clearing out a storage unit, that 11 notebooks, a stack of carbon-copied reports, and a small tin box of undeveloped film that, when finally processed decades too late, turned out to be entirely fogged and unreadable, surfaced and eventually made their way to a regional historical archive. That's where this story, such as it is, currently rests. 11 notebooks, some transfer slips, a handful of report numbers that appear in bureau filing indexes with no surviving content behind them, a payroll ledger with 4 unexplained, adjusted entries, and the second-hand, decades-late memory of a foreman who apparently never got over something he saw at the bottom of a drill hole in February of 1933. I want to be straightforward with you about where that leaves us. Nothing here proves a lost city sits under Black Canyon. Rock does strange things underground. Voids, natural caverns, mineral formations that catch a flashlight beam and throw back a shape the eye desperately wants to read as a column or a doorway. Isolated men working brutal shifts in extreme heat on a project that killed dozens of their co-workers before it was finished are not the most reliable narrators of what they saw in a dark hole in the rock at 2 in the morning. Government paperwork goes missing constantly for reasons that are almost always boring. Budget reallocation, careless filing, negatives that were simply overexposed and quietly discarded, rather than catalogued as failures. Every single piece of this story has an ordinary explanation sitting right next to the extraordinary one, and I'd be doing you a disservice if I pretended otherwise. But I keep coming back to that measurement, 27 inches. That's the riser height Doss wrote down 3 separate times, in 3 separate notebooks, years apart, never changing the number once. 27 inches isn't a step built for a person. It isn't natural erosion either. Water doesn't cut stairs. It's either nothing at all, a trick of bad light and a frightened man's imagination, hardening into false memory over 46 years of teaching high school geometry to kids who never knew what their teacher carried around in his head, or it's a measurement of something built for somebody, or something considerably larger than us. I don't know which. Nobody alive does. What I can tell you is that drill hole DH114 is still marked on Bureau of Reclamation survey records for the site, right where Everett Doss's original coordinates put it, and that as far as any public record shows, nobody has ever gone back down. The archive that holds Doss's notebooks today keeps them in a single acid-free box, available to any researcher who requests them, alongside a typed note from the archivist warning that the events described are uncorroborated by any surviving Bureau of Reclamation record. Make of that whatever you'd like. I know what I'd like it to mean. I also know that wanting a story to be true has never once made it true, and that the honest ending to this one is the same as the honest ending to most stories like it. A private notebook, a missing set of negatives, and a stair that, if it's still down there at all, nobody has measured in 90 years.